I just want to remind people that WikiLeaks published the first documents leaked by Chelsea Manning on February 18th, 2010. Is that it? Yeah. So recently, Chelsea Manning tweeted out, and I just want to remind people that the last chapter of my book, Your Country's Just Not That Into You, it's a bestseller, or, around my neighborhood. And the last chapter was devoted to Chelsea Manning and praising her and the courage that she showed. And anyway, so if you'd like to, you can get my book and read that. But she recently tweeted out, so I was also a big supporter, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Glenn Greenwald, I don't have $10,000 right now, but if I get it, I want to send it back to you from a donation you once did. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm terrified of you and everything you do. You're greedy, unprincipled, and I'm embarrassed for ever considering you a friend. So she tweeted that out on September 2nd, and then she said, last night, during the floods, I decided that I'm no longer going to be afraid of saying what's on my mind anymore or taking a stand from the people that I once considered allies, but who have chosen to bash, harass, humiliate, intimidate, and lie to get ahead. To those he has hurt, I'm sorry, I didn't say anything. I was scared, and that's my fault. I don't know what the flood... Anyway, Glenn responded by saying the only thing worse than false accusations are ones so vague you can't respond to them, allowing people's imagination to do the work. That's standard now in left liberal politics. Her false claims went viral and produced tabloid headlines like that. And the headline down there was Chelsea Manning says she's terrified of former pal Glenn Greenwald. Then you went on to say friendships that depend on political agreement were never friendships, just cynical transactions. When she was in prison trying repeatedly to kill herself, I was one of the only people who visited, spent hours on the phone, and raised money for her. No good deed goes unpunished. Tell me about it. Lots of people on the left, not all, but many, mistake friendships for political agreements, such that when the political agreement erodes for them, the friendship does too. Friendships that don't transcend politics or require political agreement have no value. But that's very well said. And I
should be a writer.
You should look into it. And I just want to show everybody that Glenn was an unbelievable supporter of Chelsea. Here's the stuff that he had written in the inhumane conditions of Bradley Manning's detention. Here's more every time you'd go on the Democracy Now! To defend her. Here's two more times on different videos you're defending questions for Glenn Greenwald and Bradley Manning. Bradley Manning, the prosecutor's overreach could turn all whistleblowings into treason. So you just constantly, I mean, we could do this all day, show you how many times you defended Chelsea. And so let's and I'll finish this. And then you say, while Julian Assange is rotting in prison, Chelsea Manning recently smeared him when he couldn't defend himself, announcing that if she had to do it over again, she would not have leaked to WikiLeaks. Maligning someone unjustly rotting in prison is not an attribute I value. Concur. And this was kind of scummy. The Intercept activist and whistleblower Chelsea Manning joins Ryan Grimm and Ken Klipperstein on Deconstructed to talk about prison, prospects for whistleblowers in the Biden era, and what she's been up to since her release. And the quote that they tweeted out was Chelsea saying, if Ken were around in 2010, he would have been the recipient. Let's just put it that way. I guess they're saying instead of Julian Assange, and that he didn't deserve it. And, of course, Aaron Mate, award-winning independent journalist Aaron Mate, says Julian Assange is currently being caged and tortured for being the recipient of those leaked documents and courageously publishing them. What a shitty thing to say, and what even more callous and bullshit thing to promote. So let me just bring in Glenn. I was stunned by the whole thing, vague accusations, and it looks like... you get maligned in a similar way. I guess you get way more heat than I'll ever take. But for bringing our message to different people of different political persuasions, which when I was younger, that used to be the gold standard. If you can convince people by the power of your arguments that your progressive ideas were right, that was always considered a victory. And I remember when I went on Tucker, so you go on Tucker Carlson's, as do I, to speak to half the country. And one time I went on and I advocated for Julian Assange, and at the end of the segment, Tucker Carlson admitted that I had changed his mind on Julian Assange, which means now the host of the #1 news show gets to say that to half the country, which I think is a huge victory. So for those kind of things, people malign us. But go ahead, Glenn, and you can say whatever you'd like to say about it.
Right. So, the context of this whole thing is that I wasn't just, a vocal advocate of Chelsea Manning's, although I did probably write more and talk more and go on TV more to defend her and what she did, which, to this very day, notwithstanding everything that happened, I do regard as heroic and deserving of admiration. But it wasn't just that. I mean, it was so much more than that. That first article that you showed when I was at Salon from 2010 about the inhumane conditions under which she was being imprisoned wasn't just a defense of her. I actually broke the story. When she was being tortured, basically, by being held in this extreme solitary confinement and these humiliating circumstances, I was able to get a source who had known about the conditions under which she was being held, and I was the first person to report that story. And by doing that, it caused President Obama's national security spokesperson, P.J. Crowley, to resign in protest because he had been in the Army, and he said, I can't believe that we would treat one of our own soldiers like this, someone who had gone to Iraq, and now we're essentially torturing her. The Obama administration transferred her very quickly after my reporting to a much better facility, which was Fort Leavenworth, and not a very good facility. It's a military brig in the middle of Kansas, but way better than the place in which she was being held, all before trial. And then I, did go everywhere and defended her. And then when she was in Fort Leavenworth, the facility had very restrictive rules about who it was that she could communicate with, because she doesn't have the same rights as an ordinary prisoner because it's a military prison. They have much more restricted rights. And under the rules of that facility, the only people with whom she was allowed to communicate or have as visitors were either lawyers or journalists. And she was able to get me on the list with the facility by virtue of my status as a journalist. And, she kept telling me over and over how important it would be for me to go visit her. And, I live in Brazil. She was in the middle of Kansas. It's like a very isolated facility. And so in 2014 or 2015, at the height of the Snowden reporting, when, I hadn't left Brazil for almost a year because of threats from the U.S. government that they were going to arrest me, I flew to Kansas City. I got a car. I drove, an hour and a half onto this military base while I was doing the Snowden reporting. It was very uncomfortable. And I visited her. I sat with hours, with her for hours, talking about the difficulties that she was undergoing in that prison. She had already announced that she was beginning her transition while in the custody of a military facility. She was having a huge amount of psychological struggles that were all very well reported. It's not like I've revealed anything by saying that. Her suicide attempts have been publicly reported. And then once I got back to Brazil, she also got me onto her call list. I was one of the very few people that she called. She had no one to call. She was in that prison all day, going crazy. But the problem was she couldn't make any phone calls unless her canteen was filled with money, and she had no money. Her family has no money. There was no one to give her money. So the only way to put money into the canteen of Chelsea Manning when she was in prison was to send a money order, which I obviously couldn't do from Brazil. So because it had to be from a U.S. bank. So my mother used to go to the bank, and with her own money or mine, I would reimburse her, buy money orders and then FedEx them to where Chelsea was in this facility so that she could call people, including me. She could buy things from the canteen, whatever. Nobody else is doing that. I was just giving her my own money all the time. And then, she was very lonely and struggling through a lot of things. And so I can't tell you, Jimmy, how many hours it's not a fun thing to have to, spend so much time giving comfort and support to somebody who you've only met once, that one time when I went to prison, when I visited her in the prison. But I regarded her as so heroic that I felt like it was my duty. And I spent, hundreds of hours, not dozens, just listening to her, talking to her. Obviously, that forms a friendship and a bond. When she needed money for her lawyers, I went to Pierre Omidyar and Freedom of the Press Foundation. We did a huge fundraiser for her. Pierre Omidyar promised to match whatever we could raise for her. We raised like $120,000, $10,000 of which was mine. That's the money she alluded to, one of the donations. And then when she was getting out of prison, there was another fundraiser where we just raised money for her just so she had like a cushion for her own personal use. When she finally got released, when Obama commuted her sentence, I donated another $10,000 to that. I helped lead that campaign. And then once she got out of prison, she just ghosted me. She just stopped talking to me because I guess she didn't need me anymore.
Wow.
And I wrote her a couple of times that, I published all the DMs because the accusations that she posted were so ambiguous that it implied that I was like harassing her or threatening her, right? To say she's terrified of me makes it seem like we have some interpersonal drama when that was never the case. She just stopped, she would go on Good Morning America. She would go on the Today Show, but she would never respond to any of my messages. I once asked her if she would, come on Jeremy Scahill's podcast, which I was co-hosting. Ironically, I ended up interviewing Tucker instead. She just didn't answer. And then out of the blue, the first time I heard from her was in 2018, where she wrote to me and just started barraging me with complaints that I was going on Fox News, that I was going on Tucker Carlson, that I wasn't being as hard on Trump as I should be, saying that she was involved in some sort of war against fascism to take Tucker off the air and was demanding to know which side am I on. And it became very apparent, as the DMs I published demonstrate, that she really wasn't interested in a friendship, that she was really interested in just yelling at me about what she perceived as my political choices. There was nothing else more to it than that. We had no interpersonal conflict. And so it got to a point in 2018 where I basically just stopped responding to her because there was nothing to the interaction. She was just voicing the same complaints about me that any random liberal on Twitter voices about me every day. I go on Fox. I seem to like Trump. I'm too harsh on Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. And there was just nothing to the friendship anymore. So I just stopped responding. And it wasn't until 3 years later, out of the blue, when she went and denounced me that way in those very harsh and vicious and personal terms designed to harm my reputation. And what was so, kind of extraordinary about it was, and this was the most sickening part to me, was not what she did, because she's been through a great deal. I know that she's a person who's still struggling a lot with many things. She even said it in that series of tweets. It was all of these journalists who never gave the slightest shit about Chelsea Manning, were nowhere to be found all those years I was defending her, calling on her to be released from prison, raising money for her. They didn't give the slightest shit about her. Many of them thought she was trash, that she belonged in prison, that she had done wrong. Suddenly, they started exploiting this obviously unwell person, somebody that they never cared about at all, pretending that they were her champion because they could use and exploit her as a way of trying to get at me and harm my reputation because of the critiques I make about their media culture. So that was a really disgusting spectacle. And, for me, as I said in that series of tweets, this is just left-wing culture. There are no friendships in left-wing culture. If you deviate in any way from someone else's political dogma, they declare you your enemy, no matter what else you've done in your life. And there's really no such thing as friendship. And this is the currency. They denounce people. They try and destroy people. It's how they get attention and how they get applause. I'm no fan of Nathan Robinson, who, is the socialist founder of Current Affairs. He's criticized me and many times in harsh ways. But look at what they just did to Nathan Robinson, this guy who started this small socialist magazine, made it barely survivable. Unlike AOC, he actually lived up to his principles, because even though he was the founder, he announced early on and kept to it that he would pay himself exactly the same as what even the lowest level, entry level worker gets. So he got $40,000 a year, barely livable wage, and everyone at the company got exactly what he got, living up to his standards. And they just out of the blue denounced him as though he were this capitalist tycoon and tyrant, and destroyed the magazine and destroyed him, and he hasn't been back online. This is all they know. They have no politics. So these kind of rituals of denunciation, of condemnation, it's just what happens on the left. And while Chelsea obviously was a radical figure, somebody who, like me, risked her security in the name of transparency and other things, over time, like so many of these people, Trump basically turned her into just a standard liberal. And her only view of the world is very binary. It's, are you against Trump and do you view Trump and Tucker Carlson as fascists and want to destroy them, or don't you? As she said it, which side are you on? And so that was the only foundation for what she implied, attacking me after not talking to me for 3 years. Of course, I responded in a pretty aggressive way. It was hurt. I'm a human being. You know, I know what I did for her. I know the friendship that we had, I thought, formed. And so to watch somebody like that with no warning, no attempt to like mediate, just go and try and destroy your reputation over political differences that are very banal and trite, obviously it was hurtful to me and I responded with that emotion. But I think the broader reflection and the broader indictment is one of how left liberal culture, especially in the political scene, functions. It's self-immolating. It's incredibly self-destructive, and we see stuff like this all the time.
I can't.
Oh, and can I just add one more point that I find so ironic? When she got out of prison, she started talking to a bunch of like alt-right figures who were supportive of her, like Mike Cernovich and Cassandra Fairbanks. And they invited her to this party that they were going to, because by then WikiLeaks had become popular on the right because of what they had done in the 2016 election. And she went and she got her picture taken with Cernovich, with a bunch of those other people.
No way.
And yeah, you can go find it right now. Chelsea Manning gets caught at alt-right party or whatever. And all these liberals and even people on the left are like, this is repugnant. Chelsea Manning is a fascist. And I wrote an article at The Intercept defending her and saying, are you people fucking insane? She went to fucking prison for 8 years for her beliefs, to stand up to the CIA and reveal war crimes. And because she goes to like one party with no context, no explanation, you're going to write her off as a fascist when she did more than anyone to confront fascist institutions, more than you can do in 1,000 lifetimes. So it was so ironic that she felt free to, kind of congregate and socialize with people widely considered to be fascists and Nazis, and then turns around and says, because I go on the most watched show, the one that you go on that has an audience of 4 million people to try and change minds, that must mean that I'm some kind of crypto fascist.
Wow. I'm as flummoxed by the whole thing as you are. And to see her kind of side with the people who were, by the way, she was bipartisan condemnation of her. I mean, it was Barack Obama who tortured her. It was the Democrats who tortured her. It was Joe Biden who tortured her. So now is she kind of
Jimmy, she had no defenders. No defenders. I mean, even people who were back then defending WikiLeaks, that group already was very small, of people defending Julian and WikiLeaks for publishing the documents. But what she did, she wasn't the publisher. She was the actual person in the military who took the classified documents and gave them to WikiLeaks. So there are a lot of people who are willing to defend WikiLeaks, but say, but what Chelsea Manning did deserves prison. She had very few defenders, very, very few. I was one of the very few. And as you showed, I mean, it wasn't like I occasionally defended her. It was like a principal crusade of mine, because what was done to her was so horrific. And so you get repaid by this. Now, I'm not saying she owes me like a lifetime of gratitude, but to publicly denounce someone in that way should take a huge amount of betrayal, not just small political differences or even big ones.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I disagree with Glenn Greenwald's strategy of appearing on this outlet, and here's why.
Exactly.
We can have a debate about it, and but to just smear you like that, and so here's the thing. So which side is she on? My question is, which side is she on? If she's against Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump, right? Okay, which is a legitimate position to have. So does that mean she would be supportive of Joe Biden? Because Joe Biden literally tortured her. And so that seems like she's in it. So who did she support? Did she support Howie Hawkins? Who was she supporting in the election? Was it the guy who committed the war crimes that she exposed?
It was the people who tortured her. It was the people who tortured her. I mean, this is crazy. The comment that she made about Julian is so revealing. Why did Julian? The only thing that changed about Julian and WikiLeaks from the time that she picked them to leak to and now is that in many people's minds, WikiLeaks helped defeat Hillary Clinton, not exactly a defender of Chelsea Manning, by publishing incriminating documents, true and authentic and incriminating documents about Hillary Clinton that helped defeat the Democrats and elect Donald Trump. And for that crime of helping defeat the people who tortured and imprisoned her, she now apparently views WikiLeaks as so evil, the same way she views me as evil. She said, I'm terrified of you. You're a greedy person. It's so weird to be called a greedy person by someone who I gave a huge amount of money to in complete anonymity and secrecy, not seeking out any publicity at all. But leave that aside. I mean, what she did to me, she did to Julian. But unlike me, who can defend myself, he can't. He's in prison. And she obviously did it because she hates him because of the partisan effect he had on the election. He helped defeat the party that imprisoned and tortured her. And she's obviously a Democrat. She's obviously a liberal. That's, like I said, her grievances to me in my DMs are no different than what, Joy Reid and Chris Hayes viewers, will say when explaining why they hate me. It's exactly the same. It's not like coming from a radical place or an anti-establishment place. It's coming from shit liberalism and nothing else.
And so what could it seems so insane. It seems insane that she would side with the people who tortured her. Over what? I don't know. And then also turn on a guy who's currently being tortured. It's certainly indefensible. It certainly doesn't make any sense. There's no logic to it. And it's an extreme tragedy because what Chelsea did was heroic. And
that'll never change.
And unfortunately, now it's just completely destructive. To do that to Julia, hey, all right, Glenn Greenwald, he's award-winning. He can defend himself. He is free. He has a platform, and that's one thing that she did such vague attacks at you, which is again just ridiculous. But to do that to Julian Assange when he's unable to defend himself and is literally on the brink of death, being tortured for publishing.
It's sickening and it's cowardly. And also, not only to say, oh, let's just say that if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't, essentially have anything to do with those pieces of shit. The guy who's like lingering and dying in prison because he published the documents that I wanted the world to see. It's not just that. She said, I would have given them to The Intercept.
Yeah.
The news outlet that, at least in one case, was extremely reckless by their own accounts and how they failed to protect the source who provided them with documents. And she ended up going to prison. Now, as I've said before, she would have ended up in prison even if The Intercept had conducted itself perfectly. But still, and there have been questions in other cases about their issues with source protection. So of all outlets to venerate as a way of demeaning Julian Assange while he's rotting in prison, to choose The Intercept to do it, I think shows where she is politically and psychologically and in other ways.
Yeah. I guess we leave it there because it's such a gut wrencher for me. It's so distasteful to see. I mean, to literally side with your torturers shows a illogic, at the very least, an illogic into the thinking. There is no logic to that. And again, if you're upset that, again, WikiLeaks, there was no documents to release on Trump, right? Because Trump didn't have a 50-year career in politics where he was doing nefarious stuff. And by the
Jimmy,
way,
there's such a fucking stupid argument. It's like I remember when I was doing the Snowden reporting about the NSA and all their, aggressive spying activities, mass surveillance, people would say, why aren't you reporting on China? And why aren't you reporting on Russia? And I would say, because nobody fucking leaked me documents on China and Russia. Right. They leaked me documents on the United States, presumably because that's my country and my government. And the citizens of that country are the people with whom I speak most frequently in my journalism. So yeah, when they would say to about Julian, why didn't he leak archives about Donald Trump because he didn't fucking get documents about Donald Trump. Right. He got them about Hillary Clinton. And let's remind everyone that those documents that he published in 2016 were so newsworthy that literally every news outlet covered the contents of those documents, and it forced the resignation of the top 5 officials of the Democratic National Committee, including its chairwoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because it revealed systematic cheating in the election, in the democracy that all liberals love, on behalf of Hillary Clinton to defeat Bernie Sanders. So there's no question that those documents were in the public interest.
So, Glenn, again, I'm a comedian, I'm not a psychiatrist, but there is that phenomenon known as Stockholm Syndrome. And it seems like this would be a manifestation of that. She's actually now siding with her jailers.
Look, I mean, here's the thing, Jimmy, it's like she really did go through hell and back.
Right.
It wasn't just being tortured, being imprisoned, and I was at that facility. I mean, I almost felt like traumatized just being there for a day. I remember watching her being taken back through the 8 metal doors or whatever, and that memory has stuck with me to this very day. On top of which she transitioned, while in a military brig in Kansas, fighting them for hormonal treatments and surgeries and the right to grow out her hair and to be treated as female. And as I said, media reports, not me revealing it, but media reports have said that at least on 2 occasions she tried to commit suicide, once while in prison and once out. So she's a person who has struggled a great deal psychologically and emotionally for reasons that are understandable. And I don't want to speculate on exactly what her mental health struggles are at this moment because I don't know enough to do so. But that's why it was so repugnant watching these people who never gave the slightest fuck about Chelsea Manning suddenly pretending to be so upset and angered on her behalf by what I had done and said to her. And they were knowingly exploiting this woman who, by her own admission, is so unwell. She twice tried to take her life for these petty political ephemeral gain. What did it change? It made me trend on Twitter for one day. People who already hated me used it to say why they hated me. People who don't hate me didn't give a shit and never will. It changed nothing. They just got their little dopamine rush by exploiting this unwell person.
Okay. Well said, I guess. Again, it's just a tragedy all the way around. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you would do that. I'm sure you would do it all over again, though, right, Glenn?
Without the slightest doubt. I always had this conversation when people would come to me and say, I really think WikiLeaks' work is important. I support their mission, but I just can't support them any longer because I think Julian Assange is an asshole. And I'd be like,
Christ.
You know what? Julian Assange is an asshole in a way that most people are. He's just difficult. He's egotistical. He's stubborn. But I would always say to them 2 things. First of all, this is somebody who has stood up to the world's most powerful factions for 15 years. And when he was threatened, he released more of their documents. He innovated how people can leak the most sensitive documents of the most powerful corporations and governments in the world. Do you think that's going to be done by a person who's mild-mannered and polite and just kind of easygoing? The things that you hate about him in a personality sense are very related to why he created WikiLeaks in the first place. WikiLeaks isn't going to get created by Ezra Klein or Chris Hayes. It's going to get created by the Julian Assanges of the world. But the other issue always was for me, who gives a fuck if you like Julian Assange or not?
It doesn't matter.
What matters is he's out there revealing the secrets of war criminals, of the CIA, of the Pentagon, of, he helped spark the Arab Spring, according to the New York Times, by revealing widespread corruption in Tunisia and all these other, Arab dictators in Bahrain that got overthrown or were close to getting overthrown. He's done so much immense good for the world that to prioritize your view of his personality above the impact that he's had on the world is demented. And that's kind of how I feel about Chelsea. When all is said and done, the crowning, defining achievement and legacy of Chelsea's life, aside from, inspiring people by being outspoken about being trans in a difficult moment, is that she leaked these documents. And these documents were a treasure trove of highly valuable archives that the public had every right to know and that did a great deal of good in the world. And for me, that's always going to be what I think most about when I think of Chelsea Manning. And if somebody asked me today, what do you think of Chelsea Manning? The first words out of my mouth are not going to be, oh, she did a really shitty thing to me or is a bad friend. It's going to be, she's a national hero for having sacrificed for liberty to make sure those documents got public.
So, Glenn, when you say friendships that are based on political agreement were never friendships in the first place, so I do stop being friends with people who don't think like me exactly. Isn't that weird? So I guess I should relook at that. I guess I gotta call Aaron Matei back. All right. So I guess
you should. I should look. I mean, it's funny, Jimmy. My husband, as you know, is in politics. He's a member of a socialist party. Sometimes he and I have different views on things, and he, for example, believes like pretty much everyone in Brazil, almost across the spectrum, that censorship is sometimes warranted, including of hate speech online. And he and I have passionate disagreements about that and debates about that. I don't divorce my fucking husband, although sometimes I see people on the Brazilian left saying, why doesn't David Miranda divorce Glenn Greenwald given like all this shit he does? He goes on Tucker Carlson and defends Trump. It's like, how deranged are you? We've been married for 16 years. We have 2 kids and like 1,000 dogs together, and our lives are intertwined and we love each other. You think we're supposed to get divorced because we don't agree on every single last thing politically after 16 years? But this is like, when you remove religion and you remove community and you remove connection, politics becomes religion. And that is what's happened to large sectors of the left.
Yeah. I would, if Steph was for online censorship, I would leave her. So that's a different.
It's a hard one to swallow.
I'm a little more principled than you are, I guess, on this.
Exactly. Clearly.
I care. I really care. But luckily, she's not for it. So that's.
I'm for common sense censorship, Jimmy. We know that.
There you go, Steph. You and David should get on the phone, get on the line, and work that out.
Common sense censors. That's right. Hey, everybody, we just added stand-up dates in Florida and Arizona. And we are going to be at Harlow's. We just added a second show in Sacramento, California on October 3rd. Is it the 3rd? I think so. So go to jimmydorcomedy.com for the Florida tickets, the Tempe tickets, and the Sacramento, California. See you there.